thank you, everybody that's here, for being part of the Liferay community and for being here at Devcon. As Andy said, my name is Jeff Handa. I lead our solution delivery enablement team. And one of the things that we offer as part of that team is service we call the Solution Concierge Desk. The Solution Concierge Desk is something that works with our partners and some internal teams and helps them embrace new technologies and new delivery methods. And a lot of that involves Liferay SaaS as well as past projects and self-hosted projects that are trying to embrace kind of the newer approaches and technologies. Now, as you can imagine, in that role, we see a lot of things, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And that's really what this talk is going to be about, is just kind of some best practices, things that we've seen and some patterns that we've seen that we think you should be embracing. Now, originally, the subtitle of the talk was SaaS and CX best practices. But another thing that my team does is create enablement content. So we are working on a lot of new content, and you're going to hear about it later. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. But it's safe to say that as we're creating this new content, we're really trying to put all of these best practices into play to make sure that we are addressing the lessons learned. And as we've been working on this, it's really clear that what we are talking about is not limited to Liferay SaaS at all. It's really going to be applicable to anybody that is starting a Liferay project today, regardless of how you're going to deploy it, or even customers and community members that are upgrading a project today. So in my mind, as I think about this topic, I really think about it as more modern Liferay application development. Now, I'd be the first one to say I don't love that phrase, because as soon as you call something modern, the alternative becomes old, stodgy, antiquated, heaven forbid the L word, legacy. And I don't want to imply that at all. The other approach, module-based development, is still very relevant. And in some cases, it's the right way to do things. However, as you've been hearing over and over yesterday and today, client extensions, objects, all of these things have come a long way. And so with Liferay in 2024, you should be thinking about these modern approaches. And really, honestly, at the end of the day, modern Liferay application development is the best term that I could come up with. So if you can think of a better way to describe it, let me know. Now, this is not an official term. If you go to learn.liferay.com and you search for modern Liferay application development, you won't see it. But it is a term that I think we are starting to kind of socialize and use more. And so you'll probably start to see it a little bit more in the future. Now, before we dive into modern application development with Liferay, I want to kind of cover a few things that it's not, things that we're not going to be focusing on. One of those things is themes, using themes to modify the look and feel of your platform. Now, themes were great for what they gave us. Themes allowed us to do a lot of things in the past, but they also tended to cause a lot of problems when it came time to upgrade. Even if you automate your upgrade process, there's going to be a lot that you're going to have to deal with themes. And so we've really been focused, and our product team's really been focused on figuring out how do we give you the same abilities but without the baggage that comes with themes. So modern Liferay application development does not use themes. Instead, it's going to embrace things like style books and front-end client extensions. You're going to be able to achieve the same outcomes, but because we're now detached from the Liferay core, you're going to be able to do it in a much more maintainable way. Maintainability is going to be a theme we're going to talk about a lot. Now, modern Liferay application development also doesn't use features such as Service Builder, REST Builder, Java portlets. Again, there's nothing wrong with these technologies and these features. Honestly, I'm more comfortable writing a portlet than some of the alternatives. But all of those technologies contribute their own maintenance debt. So as soon as you start to go down that path, you're incurring debt that you're going to have to pay back next time that you go to upgrade. So again, that's why we have been trying to provide alternative solutions. And modern Liferay application development is going to use features such as objects to help you model your data and your APIs. API Builder is coming in the future. It's currently in beta, but we've heard a lot about that already. That's going to obviate the need for REST Builder in most cases. And instead of using portlets to develop, you're going to be using things like React, Angular, maybe Vue.js widgets that are going to be packaged as client extensions. So again, the goal here is to let you achieve the same outcomes, but in a way that's going to be easier to maintain. And then finally, when we're talking about modern Liferay application development, we're really not talking about interacting with the service layer directly anymore. Now, Liferay provides a lot of value out of the box, a lot of capabilities and features. And one of the great things about Liferay development, traditional module-based Liferay development, is that you could interact with those directly. And so you could leverage the power of Liferay, leverage the power of Liferay data directly in your own code from within templates. Again, this was convenient. It was great. Service locator was awesome. But again, every time you touch that service layer directly, you are incurring that maintenance debt. And when you go to upgrade, or let's be honest, even a hot fix sometimes could change a method signature, and you could end up with some rewriting that you would have to do. So again, Liferay wants to make sure that you can continue to interact with all of the data and all of the functionality, but do it in a way that's going to be easier to maintain. So we've provided alternate approaches, and in this case, it's the headless API. Liferay provides a whole suite of headless APIs, whether it's the Open API-based RESTful or the GraphQL. We want to make sure that you can interact with this data and continue to do so, but not have to worry about constantly changing method signatures and the portal's internal evolution. Again, we have been working really hard the last several years to make sure that anything you can do through the web UI, you can do through the headless APIs. If you find a place where you can't, let us know, because that's something that we want to address. And for all new development, we're really taking kind of a headless first approach to ensure that from the very beginning, those headless APIs are going to be available to you and to us as we build the product in a much more maintainable way. Okay. So now that we know what we're not going to be talking about, let's dig in and actually start to talk about what are the best practices for modern Liferay application development. We're going to keep it pretty high level here. We're not going to get down to the code level, but we'll start with some kind of higher level general recommendations and move into things that are more specific to working with client extensions. And again, regardless of how you're going to deploy Liferay, whether it be SaaS, PaaS, self-hosted, these things really apply to everybody. So first, follow the rules. Follow the existing Liferay DXP best practices. I know a lot of times people start thinking, or when they first approach Liferay SaaS specifically, they really feel like this is a completely different thing, but it's not. At the end of the day, Liferay DXP or Liferay Portal, that's what's giving you the business value. That's what's allowing you to solve problems, and it doesn't matter how it's deployed. Any existing best practices should really be observed. However, the portal is evolving very rapidly, so it's also important that you embrace the new features as they come along. For an example, in most cases, if you're doing modern Liferay application development, you should be preferring things like collections and display pages as opposed to using Asset Publisher and creating queries with Asset Publisher. On the Solution Concierge desk, we've run into a couple of situations where customers are really, frankly, abusing Asset Publisher. It's never a good idea to have 10 Asset Publishers doing complex queries on your homepage, regardless of how you're deploying. In that case, using things like search blueprints and collections and fragments allowed them to achieve much, much better performance than they would have had by really overusing Asset Publisher. Another one, too, is avoid those anti-patterns. One of the most common ones that we see is free marker abuse. Remember, free marker is a template language. It is not a Swiss Army knife. Just because you can do something with free marker doesn't mean you should do something with free marker. Next, start with what's in the box. Liferay gives you a lot of really good things in the box. We don't give you puppies. We could talk to product management about that. But we give you a lot of really useful things. And when you start your Liferay development, that's the first thing you want to look at. What do I get out of the box? How can I solve this business problem? How can I create this solution leveraging those out-of-the-box features? Again, if it's out of the box, it's our upgrade headache. It's our maintainability headache and not yours. Now, with Liferay evolving as rapidly as it is with the quarterly releases, sometimes it's hard to keep track of all of the new features that are coming out in Liferay. So a great resource for you to use to keep up with that is the material that we're publishing on learn.liferay.com. We've recently launched a course called Building Enterprise Websites with Liferay, and that is a very comprehensive course of all of Liferay's out-of-the-box features, a very opinionated course showing you Liferay best practices. I would definitely recommend that you start there. And one of the greatest things about that course is that we in the enablement team, we've committed to keep that course up to date. So every quarter, we take a look at the quarterly release, we work with the product team, and then we try to make sure that that course is evolving to showcase those new features. Great example is when utility pages came out, we had to go back and update the course to talk about utility pages for things like login and all the new changes to JDK that came out. We updated the course. So again, even if you've looked at the course in the past, it might be good every quarter to go back and take a quick look and kind of skim through, because that's a great way to find out what are those new features and how are they being used. If a new feature doesn't give you everything that you need, again, don't be afraid to get creative, but also those features, if there's a gap and it's a gap that you think other people are going to run into, we definitely want to hear about that. We want to close those gaps. You heard Marco and Brian talk about this yesterday. We want to give you more out of the box. We don't want to give you 80%. We want to give you 100%. So when you find those gaps, please work with us. Again, work with your technical account manager or technical account services if you're working with them. Work with your GS representatives. Reach out through the community Slack channels. However you can get to us, we want to know about those feature requests and those gaps that you're perceiving. And we want to try to patch those as quickly as possible. It might be possible that we can get something into a quarterly release in time to meet your project timeline. If we can't, or if the gap is unique to you and your use case or your client's use case, well, then we have documented extension points. So again, try to use those, try to use as much out of the box as possible, extend, rather than starting wholesale from scratch. Now, if we don't give you anything out of the box that's useful, the next thing you want to look at would be the Liferay Marketplace. You've heard a lot about Liferay Marketplace. It was relaunched not too long ago, and it really is an ever-growing resource of features, functionality, integrations, and it's divided into two different sections. So we have discrete applications and we also have solutions. The applications are being contributed across a variety of different categories, some from Liferay, some from service partners and technical partners, some from the community. So if you can't do something that you need to out of the box, the first stop would be check the marketplace for what's already there. And of course, for you that are creating interesting features and interesting integrations, the marketplace is a great place for you to go and monetize those creations, as well as to go out there and showcase your Liferay knowledge and capabilities. Next, I want to talk about providing your teams the right tools and processes. Again, if you are coming from traditional module-based Liferay development, well, then you're already very familiar with the importance of tooling and processes. If you're working with Liferay Pass, you're already benefiting from a complete CI/CD pipeline that we provide that's based on a lot of years of experience. But for our Liferay SaaS customers, sometimes this isn't something that they really think about. And for customers that are trying to deploy client extensions, even if they're not on SaaS, this might be something new to really think about. And it is something that you should think about, and you should think about early in the process. Liferay Workspace is still going to be your starting point. You want to make sure that you're using Liferay Workspace to organize your code. You should take a look at the Liferay sample workspace to kind of get an idea of all those client extensions and how they're organized there. You're still going to be using the Blade CLI for local development, local deployment, creating deployable artifacts. And if you are deploying to the cloud, you're going to be using the Cloud CLI. And so all of those tools are available to you. We don't have a full CI/CD pipeline for Liferay SaaS, at least not yet, but that shouldn't stop you from creating one using those tools, and hopefully that's something that will be addressed very soon. Again, I can't stress enough, we'll come back and we'll talk about this again in another slide coming up, but this is something you want to do at the very beginning of the project and not wait to the end of the project. Make sure that you have a way to deploy your code into a realistic environment. Next up, I want to talk about how you organize your code and why it's important to properly organize and package your code. It's got very big ramifications in both the short term and the long term. In the short term, how you package and organize your code has a direct impact on the resources that you're allocated. Some of our SaaS plans start with a single virtual CPU and a gig of memory. And if you're not careful in how you package things, you can quickly consume all of those resources, even if you don't have a very complex deployment scenario. Let's say, for example, you have 3 different applications. They are Spring microservice-based applications. Each one of those is going to be spinning up a Spring Boot server. Each one of those is going to be having its own a certain amount of overhead, duplicated overhead, and you're going to end up using more resources than perhaps you might need if you had just packaged those 3 together. Now, that might be an overly simplified scenario, but again, real-world example from the Solution Concierge Desk, we've had customers that have done things like a single front-end a CSS client extension, maybe using 1/10 of their processor. They've got a JavaScript client extension using another 1/10. They've got a React widget that's using 1/10. and then they've got a Spring Boot microservice, and they've allocated 2/10 of a CPU. At that point, they're up to half of virtual CPU just in their UAT environment. You double that into prod, and now they're blocked from deploying anything else, and they really aren't using that many resources. So they could have very easily packaged all of those front-end client extensions together, freeing up resources, and any future back-end client extensions they could package together as well. Again, keep in mind there are some limitations. You can't mix front-end and back-end together, but you can do things like configuration plus a microservice, configuration plus a batch job. So there are some options, and it's all documented on learn.liferay. Now, in the longer term, how you package a code, that's obviously going to have a big impact on maintainability. If we go back to that first example where we've got 3 applications, well, what if one of them is for the HR department, one's for finance, one's for marketing? What if they're being deployed and managed by different teams? Do you really want 3 different teams, maybe even external teams, working on a single client extension? I mean, that's obviously not going to be a good idea. A new developer comes on board and needs to understand what's going on with the HR application. They've got all of this extra noise to get through. So again, we want to make sure that we are trying to be as efficient as possible, but we also want to make sure that we are planning for that maintainability. So again, from the very beginning, think about who's going to be maintaining the code, how it's going to be maintained, and what resources do you have available. A lot of times we get involved on projects, and the people that are developing the project have no idea what's been allocated or provisioned to them because they weren't involved in that sales process. So find out how much do we have in our plan and our add-ons, and how can we use it strategically. Next, I want to talk about how you design your models and your APIs for performance. Again, when we approach data modeling, many of us, we instinctively start thinking about normalizing our entities, coming up with a normalized data model, and pretty soon we have many objects representing many tables. And again, there's a lot of value that comes from working with normalized data, but keep in mind, we're going to be interacting with this data through our headless APIs. So if we have multiple objects that we need to interact with in order to create our complex model that we're creating, there's going to be some performance issues that we're probably going to run into eventually. Remember, we're using those headless APIs, and so a good way to think about it is that when you are working locally in Liferay, the calls are coming from within the house. It's very easy to ask for something. When you're working in a client extension, the calls are coming from outside of the building. If you want something, you've got to knock on the door, you've got to show your ID, you've got to unlock the door. And if you have to do that 5 times to update different object endpoints, you're going to pretty quickly run into performance issues. Now, some of this could be mitigated if you have access to REST Builder. You could create more efficient APIs. But if you don't, the reality is that you're going to need to think about, how do I interact with this data? And that's going to have to play a role in how you design your objects and therefore your APIs. That brings us to the next point, and that's leverage batch processing. Again, I am, as a part of the enablement team, I'm oftentimes kind of disappointed to find out how many people have never heard of the batch endpoints and the batch APIs that are available, and that's something we need to do a better job of. I'm glad that we've had sessions about it today. Everybody at Devcon should know about them. But with the batch endpoints, you're going to be able to have a much better experience for your users. Again, remember that example. Even if I get my API modeled in a way that I can make one single call, what happens when I have 1,000 records or 10,000 records or 100,000 records to update? If each one of those calls has to, again, knock on the door, show its ID, and unlock the door, your performance is going to be crushed. If I could package all of those records, as many of us saw yesterday with the Pokemon example, if I have 800 of them and they're all in a single payload, then that's one call. I unlock the door one time and I process all of those records. So it's going to be a much better performance experience. Again, that's another good segue into the next one, which is to embrace asynchronous patterns. Traditional monolithic development, and Liferay is a monolith, it follows a very request-driven synchronous type of pattern. And that works great if you're inside of a portlet and you're interacting with Liferay directly. But again, as soon as we move into that client extension world, we're moving towards that microservices-based approach, and we have to embrace those asynchronous patterns. Now, for some of this is a real paradigm shift. This is hard to kind of think about how do we handle that situation. But it is something that is going to pay off when you move into that world. You'll notice huge benefits. Again, where we've seen this be an issue is in object actions. We've worked on a lot of projects where object actions are calling back into Liferay to maybe get some more data and enrich the data model, or maybe to do some type of validation. And that call back to Liferay may trigger another call. Well, if that initial request is blocked and held open that whole time, and you start to have a lot of traffic to your site, again, performance is just going to kind of crush your system. So if you do have an object action that needs to perform some type of complex logic, you need to think about how I can do that in an asynchronous way. Let me fire that object off, and again, maybe it's a message queue system. I can wait and I can come back and check on that later and then continue processing. Again, being completely transparent, we don't always do a great job in our sample code. A lot of our sample code is very trivial examples, and that's something that we are actively working on, and definitely in the enablement material you're going to learn about a little bit later today. Rest assured that we are going to be showing you more realistic examples, more best practices, so that you can pattern your code after those best practices. Okay, another convenient pattern that we had in monolithic development is that our code runs inside of Liferay. That means that it has access to Liferay's permission checker. You could call Liferay's services layer directly in the past. You could call local services if you didn't want to bother with permission checking. You could call remote services, and the context and permission checker would decide if you should have access or not. But again, we're outside of Liferay now. We're outside the building. How do we get in? Well, with client extensions, OAuth is the way that we show our ID and we unlock the door to get into Liferay. So as you're creating your client extensions, you'll be creating OAuth applications. Make sure that your OAuth applications, you're defining the scopes to access just what's needed. And again, all of your standard OAuth best practices should apply. So make sure that you're restricting your access tokens to just the least amount of privileges that are needed. Make sure that your OAuth keys are being stored securely. And to make sure that you're using service accounts where appropriate and not having everything happening under a single user's account. Okay. Another new paradigm that we need to think about is external reference codes and using those to identify things. Again, in Liferay in the past, we were very comfortable just working with Liferay entity IDs, whether it be a user ID, a journal article ID, a group ID. That worked just fine if you're inside of that Liferay context, but as modern Liferay application developers, we need to learn to rely on that external reference code, or ERC. The ERC is an alphanumeric code that identifies our entity across the entire system, the end-to-end system, even across multiple systems as you're passing data back and forth. Again, in this distributed paradigm, it's really important that you know exactly what entity you're working with. And as we've seen and we've kind of alluded to with the batch APIs and with things like Site Initializer, it's going to be really important as we move things like structures and objects between environments that you know exactly what you're working with. And even though the local object IDs may change, the ERCs wouldn't change between systems. So that ERC is going to play a big role. Now, if the data is coming from an external system, if this is an order that's coming from an order management system, if this is a product that's coming from a PIM, you don't have any control in those cases over what the ERC is. However, if Liferay creates the entity, Liferay is going to use the UUID as the ERC. But you don't have to stick with that. So Liferay allows you to change the ERC. In some cases, you can do it through the UI. In some cases, you can do it through the API endpoints. And you can also set it when you create the entity. And so you can definitely create more meaningful ERCs. And if you create a more meaningful ERC, well, then your headless endpoints that refer to it by ERC are going to become much more developer friendly. They're going to actually give you information about the data that you're working with. So that's kind of a nice side effect of coming up with a friendly ERC as opposed to just using that cryptic UUID. Just like any other application, when you're developing a modern Liferay application, testing is critical, but we want to make sure that we are testing early, we want to make sure that we are testing often, and we want to make sure that we are testing realistically. Okay, so just working on your local development environment is not going to cut it when you actually are working with a distributed application. A great example of this is that some things will behave very differently if they're in the local environment or in their distributed environment. An example that we've seen, again, on projects, real-world projects, if you're deploying locally, some of our JavaScript utilities will work just fine inside of a front-end client extension. So if you're using things like Liferay.get or Liferay.language.get, Works great if you're doing testing locally, you're getting your language key, all is good. When you move into that distributed environment and your client extension is no longer being served by Liferay, but out there in the world, that Java utility is going to fail. And if you wait until you're dev complete to actually move that into a realistic test environment, your project timeline is going to suffer because you're going to have to go back and probably update maybe a lot of other JavaScript utilities as well. So that's why it's so critical from the very beginning to make sure that you've got that your tools we talked about and processes in place so that from the very beginning you're deploying into a realistic scenario to see how things are working and to find out what works and what doesn't. Performance is also very critical when we start to talk about a distributed system. So a single user running on a local environment, those synchronous patterns and those individual API calls may not be noticeable. But as soon as you move it into a distributed environment and you're actually having to pay the price of making calls across the network, as soon as you start to ramp up the data, that little bit of delay on a synchronous call is going to really start to add up and you're going to see those performance problems. If you wait till the very end of your project and you start thinking about that, it's going to be a lot harder to try to re-architect it. And that's really the only thing that you can do at that point is to re-architect the whole thing. So again, from the very beginning, make sure that not only are we designing it with that in mind, but we're testing it to make sure that our assumptions are correct and are accurate. And then finally, leverage browser compute power when it's available versus server-side resources. Traditional Liferay development, we're very familiar with that kind of server-side processing. If we think about the portlet lifecycle and everything we do behind the scenes, if we think about JSP processing and rendering, again, there's nothing wrong with those approaches. They're very, very good what they do, but now that we're moving into client extensions and now that we're moving to more modern Liferay application development, we have other options available to us. And so we can use things like JavaScript, React widgets to be our front ends. So there's already been some talks about that today. If you didn't see Dave's talk earlier, make sure you go back and watch the recording. It shows you how easy it is to move those JavaScript applications into a modern Liferay solution. We support React, Angular, Vue.js, and really just about anything else that's out there. We don't have to understand how it works. We can wrap it in a client extension, and we can leverage it inside of Liferay. Now, by leveraging these front-end widgets, you're not only going to give your users a better end-user experience in many cases because the app is going to be more responsive, it's going to be faster, and get more immediate feedback, but you're also going to be freeing up those server-side resources. And so, again, you'll be able to serve more requests from the same amount of backend. All right, so I know that some of you are probably thinking, I want to be a modern Liferay application developer, right? Right? All right, at least a couple of you. But you're thinking, oh, I can't get rid of all of my service builder code. I've got too many portlets. I can't just switch everything over. I'm not here to deal in absolutes. We know what happens when you deal in absolutes. This is a transition time, an unstable era, if you will. And so we're going to see a lot of hybrid projects where some elements of modern Liferay application development are going to be packaged along with more traditional Liferay module-based deployments. And that's okay. If you're able to kind of slowly start moving in that direction, your application is going to be in a better place. It's going to be easier for you to make the full transition in the future. So for any new project, we want to use as much of this as possible. If you're on SaaS, good news. This is the only way to build applications. But if you're on PaaS or self-hosted, you can still leverage module-based deployment when it's appropriate. But before you start going down that path, think about it. Is there a modern way to solve this problem? Is there a modern way that I can achieve the same outcome and deliver business value in a way that's going to be a lot more maintainable than traditional Liferay options? All right, so just to wrap up, quick recap, follow all of your existing DXP best practices. At the end of the day, regardless of how you're deploying, DXP is the same. DXP is the product that's delivering that business value. So use those best practices appropriately. Leverage as much out-of-the-box value as possible. Again, we want to give you more than 80%. We want to give you 100%. If you can't do something out of the box that you think you should, use those community resources. We want to help you, and maybe you just don't know how to do it. Leverage the marketplace if it's not out of the box. You're going to find a lot of good stuff out there. Make sure that you're equipping your team with the right tools and the right processes so that they can deploy realistically early in the project and uncover any problems. Make sure that you're packaging and organizing your code, again, to make sure that you're using your limited resources effectively, but also to make sure that you've got a maintainable solution. Make sure that you're developing your models and your APIs with performance in mind, and leverage the batch processing to make sure that you're achieving the performance that you can with Liferay. Embrace asynchronous patterns. It may be a new thing for us, but you're going to have better performance overall if you start to think as asynchronously when you're working in client extensions. Use OAuth to secure your client extensions. Leverage ERCs to ensure you have portability across systems. Test early, test often, test realistically. And again, leverage that browser compute power when possible. Offload from the back end to the front end, whatever you can. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for being part of Devcon, and I'm happy to answer any questions outside after this. If you've got thoughts, if you've got a better name than modern Liferay application development, I would love to hear it. And enjoy the rest of your Devcon experience.